Hey everybody, it's your friendly neighborhood Jerry Rasco, and I am back with you again today for another episode of Amazing Spider-Man Art Retrospective. So today we are looking at a very important and very interesting episode or issue of The Amazing Spider-Man. We're going to be looking at issue number 39 featuring the Green Goblin. If you are a fan of the series, if you follow along with the channel and you're looking and saying, hey, there seems to be a missing episode, maybe you missed the recent live stream that we did of the previous episode, which featured issue number 38, the last issue drawn by co-creator Steve Ditko. So that episode that we did was live streamed with my friend, super historian, super fan, Nick Caputo, and he joined me to talk about that last issue of The Amazing Spider-Man drawn by Steve Ditko. And so I highly recommend, if you get a chance, go back. Make sure you watch that one. It is in the live video section of the channel, and you're going to learn a lot. Nick brought some amazing information to the episode to tell us so much about not just the issue itself and Spider-Man, but specifically about Steve Ditko, the artist, and kind of what was going on as he wrapped up his tenure with The Amazing Spider-Man. So now we're moving on to number 39, which is the first issue featuring artist John Romita. And this is, because this issue is a transition issue, this will probably be one of the only times where I'll really be comparing the two, where I'll be talking about where John Romita's art is very different, where maybe he's trying to do things similarly to try to ease the transition. So there'll be more comparisons in this episode than we'll be doing moving forward. That said, I'm very excited to bring this one to you. And of course, I want to thank everybody who subscribes to the channel and everybody that's been following along with this series. This is a passion project of mine to bring you both the history of The Amazing Spider-Man, but also to break it down into kind of an artistic view so that aspiring artists can look at this information and really learn from the people who created not only our favorite characters, but also the language of comic books, the visual language of comic books that we still use to this day. So again, thank you everybody for subscribing. Make sure you check out the playlist. Make sure that you check out that live video from last episode. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. That said, let's get over and take a look at this issue together. Here we go. So here is the cover for The Amazing Spider-Man number 39. And this is a great cover. At first glance, you might not notice a huge difference between the Steve Ditko art and here the John Romita art. There are some things, like I said, that I'll be pointing out. But overall, this is a fantastic cover. And I would say, arguably, John Romita is probably one of the most famous, certainly one of the most accomplished Marvel artists, certainly a fan favorite, and certainly very well known for his covers. Eventually, John does go on to become the art director for Marvel. And so things like this, where you're looking at a cover composition, not only did he obviously draw amazing covers, but he would also provide layouts and designs for other artists as we move into the future. But here we have his first issue of Spider-Man featuring the Green Goblin. And let's be honest, this image is iconic. If you're a fan of Spider-Man, you've seen this image somewhere. The Green Goblin swinging away with Peter, his clothes tattered, revealing his Spider-Man costume below. So really, this is truly the first time anybody besides us readers have truly identified Peter Parker and Spider-Man as being the same person. So very groundbreaking stuff, and it's absolutely terrific. This is the kind of thing that pops off the screen, pops off the shelf, and this image has been used for all kinds of merchandise, from t-shirts, posters. I've seen it reused as a Christmas advertisement for Marvel. They put a Santa Claus hat on Peter and changed the rope that he's being towed away by with like a mistletoe. So very, very famous stuff, and absolutely cannot go wrong here. One thing I do want to note as well, so we'll see this here. In the credits, you have script by Stan Lee, you have art by John Romita, and inks by Mickey DeMeo. And so in the past, we had all the art was done by Steve Ditko. That means he penciled it and he inked it himself. And if you remember, and if you've been watching any of these episodes before, you know that Steve Ditko was also doing the plot. And that means he's doing the general kind of structure or through line of the story. So he was the one coming up with sort of the general story concept. And then after the art was done, Stan would come back and do the dialogue. And so here, this gets back to more Stan is doing the full writing. John is penciling and then handing off to another inker. I bring that up because as we move forward, it's going to be very interesting to see how the inking jobs go. Back then, it was a matter of deadline and trying to get an issue out every month. And so you didn't always have the luxury of pairing one artist with one inker. There was a sort of a cadre of inkers, and jobs would get moved around based on who was available. So it's where we see some classic combinations. And then sometimes you'll see some stuff that the artist, the penciler and the inker maybe aren't on the same page and their styles didn't mesh together so well. So we'll see how that goes. But I did want to point that out because it is sort of a different division of labor than what we had seen before. And it'll be interesting to see how that becomes impactful to us as readers. I do also want to point out this. The splash page here, I've mentioned this many times if you're a fan, I really do like a splash page that gets us right into the story, and that's what we have here. So we have the Goblin riding away, talking about this plot that he has. Clearly the issue is that Spider-Man's identity is a mystery, and yet he is going to get his revenge and figure this out. So terrific stuff. The Goblin looking right at us as a reader is very impactful, very stunning. Of course, this very much mimics what we've seen on the cover, but it's not exactly the same. And with the dialogue, it takes us right into the story. Now, I apologize. Normally I do this right away. Let me emphasize this for anybody who's new. If you're here, definitely go back and check out the playlist that we have. We have been reviewing every issue of Spider-Man once a week, going all the way back to Amazing Fantasy 15. So if you go to the playlist, you can see those old episodes and get caught up to where we are today. The other thing is that this is a scanned PDF copy of the comic. In 2004, Marvel Comics got a hold of all of these issues and scanned them directly. And so that's why you see the old school ads. You'll see some wear and tear, some coloration. So either the paper is yellowed from age, or here on the cover, you can see there's been some darkening of the color and some wear around the edges, stuff like that. So this book, again, would look exactly the way it did when it came out back in 1966. So we have the Goblin. I wanted to point out this as well, and I'm going to show you an example of the difference. So this is a coloring issue, and you notice there are still no coloring credits. That's not something that we're doing. It is being handled by a team of people at Marvel, but the coloring of the Goblin is now changed. And I don't know if we'll have to see if that's something that continues or that's just this issue. But let me show you back in Amazing Spider-Man number 17, we have an appearance of the Green Goblin. And so here you have the Green Goblin. He's practicing his tricks with his newer glider. And you can really see how purple the costume is. So the body, the trunks, the cap are all a darker purple color against the green, and then his boots, satchel, and gloves are more of like a magenta color. Personally, I like that. I think it makes a lot more sense. Let's see if we get to another, maybe slightly larger picture of the goblin. Not so much in this issue. We can always zoom in, but yeah, but it is a darker purple, and you can really see the belt and the satchel here really showing up as a different color against it. In this one, everything is kind of, so the satchels become a darker purple. His boots are a darker purple. I think that does change throughout the issue. And the whole outfit, cap, gloves, bodysuit, everything is more of this reddish. I'm not going to say magenta, but definitely more of a reddish tone, which for me isn't, I don't care for it as much. I definitely like the darker purple against the green, but that's just me. So anyway, I just wanted to point out this change. It's been a few issues since we've seen the Green Goblin, so it might not be something that everybody would recognize right away. So we get into the story, and we are immediately seeing very similar layouts to what we saw coming from the Steve Ditko issues. And layout means how many panels do you put on a page, what orientation are they in, and then where the camera is placed as it's looking at that panel. Is it zoomed in, like in this case we have a nice close-up? Is it panned out further like this one where we see more of a further away shot? Or this is a great long shot here of the Green Goblin flying away. So all of those things play a part. And that was one of the things that we did certainly still see with the Steve Ditko era, was this grid composition layout, and it emphasizes the pace and a faster moving pace of the story. So we'll see how that differs. Also, much like what Steve Ditko did, and we see it in some of these issues. I don't know if there's an example here. Yeah, so we have that almost exact same panel down here. The goblin mask hanging to the side, this guy going into, I guess it looks like a safe maybe, with the door in front blocking the view of his identity. And we have almost that exact same thing right here. So that's a real nice touch, and kind of, again, gives us some consistency. The goblin is talking about his different toys, his new weapons, his improved goblin glider, all that kind of stuff. Here we have Peter. He is not feeling well, so he's heading over to the doctor's office to get a little checkup. And one of the things I said right away from this style of drawing, Peter is drawn with and most everybody in this issue, you'll know, is drawn rounder. What I mean by that, the edges, the lines of the face are softer. Peter's face is rounder. His eyes are smaller. And again, you can really see it here in some of these pictures. Like this is a great example. So here's your Peter here, where he has a much thinner chin, much bigger eyes compared to the size of the face, where here we see Peter as a much more soft, rounder faced teenager. And again, that just comes from every artist has their own style. And John Romita did come from a background where he was doing some other superhero comics, but even before that, he was really well known for drawing romance comics. That was a genre of comic book. And so your heroes and your villains were very attractive. And so drawing those soft lines of a face makes sense. It's just the way that he would be drawing. He's certainly very well known for drawing very attractive female characters, and we'll see that later as well. So, again, here, nothing crazy, but again, just like this is an example of this round Peter face. It's much thicker, and again, the eyes smaller. When you compare to, let's see, I think... now there's not a great close-up. I think that other one that we already looked at is probably about the best close-up of Peter here. And just that difference, right? Your figures tend to be a little bit thinner, Even so, it really emphasizes a guy like Flash Thompson is supposed to be an incredible athlete, and this is how thick he's drawn. And when we come in here and we look at Peter now, obviously time has gone by, but even Peter is drawn much thicker. So just some stuff. And then story-wise, the doctor checks him out and goes and gives him some medication and hopefully help this cold that he's got. But he also tells him that Aunt May, her illness that she had suffered in the past, is definitely still a problem. And if she was to have a sudden shock, she could really be in trouble, maybe even fatally. So what we're setting up here is the frailty of Aunt May. So we're really upping that level of the story to give Peter even more incentive to keep his superhero identity secret. And then really setting up this ongoing storyline that we'll see of if anything happens to Aunt May. If there's a loud noise, if there's a mouse on the floor, she's going to drop dead any minute. That's kind of the feeling that we get for quite a long time as we move through with Aunt May throughout the story, throughout the series. So Peter heads to school, and we see some of his classmates. Of course, he, as always, is in his own head, much like Peter always is. And we see Flash and some guy that nobody knows. And then here we have Harry Osborn and Norman. So we've seen Norman Osborn, especially like 2 issues ago, where we saw Norman and his old business partner was trying to kill him. So we've seen him a few times. And then we've seen Harry as well. And he's always been very antagonistic towards Peter, and also drawn really, I'll say drawn evil. I mean, the face is very pinched, his eyes very drawn down. When you first see Harry Osborn in those early Ditko issues, you look and you go, man, he's a bad person. Like, he just comes across as a bad person. Well, what we find out is maybe his dad is not quite as kind and attentive as a father as he would like. And that, of course, leads him to act out. And here we have the beginning of some mending of fences. Harry, again, upset about what's going on with his dad. Peter kind of reaches out to him, explains he's an orphan. He doesn't have any family. And the two of them begin to bond. So we go from Harry being a guy who absolutely hates Peter from day one to now kind of softening on Peter very, very quickly. And of course, we also have, though not drawn as large as some of us might like it, we do have Gwen Stacy in the background. And she is definitely now has her eyes on Peter, where before it was sort of on again, off again. She was attracted to Peter, but then sometimes not. Well, she seems to be very clearly after Peter. And now even Flash Thompson is beginning to soften on Peter. So what we're seeing here, and this is obviously a change in sort of the writing, with Steve being out and Stan Lee being fully in charge of the writing, it feels like he's trying to make Peter integrate more with the kids that he's in school with. And of course, that builds out a supporting cast that we can do more stuff with. So not necessarily a bad idea. I mean, considering up till now, we've never seen Peter Parker have a single friend, let alone even be friendly, maybe other than Betty Brant, his first girlfriend. So expanding his roster of characters that he can interact with, not necessarily a bad idea. So now we have Spidey. There's a bunch of guys holding up people at the top of the Empire State Building. And Spidey's going to jump in and stop them. So one of the things that we have here that I pointed out to me is very different. It's a perfectly fine superhero fight scene. Spidey swings in, immediately starts punching people. It's taking out these bad guys, throwing them around. That's great. When we saw the same thing happen from Steve Ditko's perspective, one of the things that he did that he was extremely good at, and I've mentioned this as recently as the last episode, is what I call his fight choreography or his choreography continuity. What I mean by that is, so here, so Spidey leaps in and punches a couple guys with both hands. Now he's striding forward and he's punching someone with his right hand. So the right hand is coming up. Now he's grabbed onto a different guy with the right hand and he's kind of throwing a hook and punching somebody with his left hand. Now there's a different guy that he's held on to with his right hand. He's throwing a different guy off with his left while kicking a guy with his right foot. And now all of a sudden everybody's grabbed him. And it's very different. Now, some of this could be coloring. It could be meant that this guy here with the green shirt is the same guy as the white shirt. But it's not, obviously, it's not drawn clear enough that the colorist knows that these are the same people. So what we have here are these gaps between the panels. Even though they're in a grid and things are supposed to be happening one moment from the next to the next, what we really have, except for something like this where they've grabbed him and he flips them off, these are the same characters around him. So we see them, they're colored correctly, they're colored the same, they're in the positions that would make sense. This guy behind him gets flung off, this guy gets flipped around on top of the other guy with the gray suit. So what I'm missing, and each of these is a little snapshot of Spidey fighting, but what Steve Ditko did so well in the same amount of space and the same kind of layout of grids, he would have Spidey moving from one move to the next move to the next move, and it all made sense. If Spidey was punching somebody with his right hand, and the right hand was up, in this next panel, that hand would probably still be up while the left hand's coming through. And then if he grabbed this guy here, it would be the same guy over here. And he was just incredible. Steve Ditko was an incredible artist when it came to that. And we're not seeing that same consistency here in this issue. The other thing I didn't really care for is the minimal. So I noted it, and then I'm a little bit wrong, but I said there's really no backgrounds. So what it is, there's this sort of mesh to keep people from jumping off the roof of the building. That's, fencing how they used to do it. Now I think it's probably would be like a clear plexiglass type of thing. So that's your background. Now there's no background for 3 panels. Then we have a little bit of the mesh again. Then we have this sort of weird silhouette of what's supposed to be the people in the background. But at no point, there's no shadow on the ground. Everybody's sort of floating in space. Again, one of the things that, and this is hopefully kind of the last issue where I'm going to be comparing so directly, but even when there was no background, Steve Ditko would do things like small lines, shadows on the floor that would root our characters in 3-dimensional space. Here, they're just sort of floating around. So, could be better. Lastly, what I'll point out here, every Spider-Man figure is relatively the same size in every panel. So one of the things that I learned, and I learned this directly from one of the artists that founded Image Comics. I'm not going to say which one. I'm not going to call him out, but one of the Image founders was talking to me one time at a convention about art and said to me, you need to not only move the camera around your scene, but also in and out throughout the page. So if you have here where this is what I would call a wide shot, meaning we can see the entire body of Spider-Man in panel 2, your next shot should be closer to bring the reader in closer to like this punch right here. So maybe you don't see this whole figure that he's grabbed, and that's okay. You don't need to. I don't care what the guy's legs are doing. Spidey's got him by the face. It looks like he's fish hooking him in the mouth. Zoom in on that. Now you could go from a top-down angle and show him kicking the guy, and then again zoom back in, and so you're constantly moving in and out. The better example of that is over here on the previous page, where you have this we're closer to Harry. Then the camera spins and turns and pulls back so that we can see more people around, including Gwen here in the background. And then we zoom back in a little bit and we see Harry and Gwen in the background behind both of them. And now we essentially pull the camera back so that now we see them, but we've pulled back far enough so that Flash Thompson is in the foreground. That's better camera move than what we see here with the fight choreography, and it's way more important than the fight choreography. So that's my thoughts on that page right there. This is a nice wide shot that kind of shows everybody. But again, my fight choreography bothers me. So you have your citizens in the background. This is nice. You have a guy in the foreground. I would say this, one small problem, his hand is resting on the panel. Put that hand slightly below the panel edge and it doesn't flatten things out. It then looks like the panel border is overlapping him and what we're seeing is inside of the page. Anytime you have something that rests like this hand right on the border, it now flattens out that image and his hand and this white part of the page are on the same plane and it breaks the illusion of 3 dimensions. So slight thing there, but here's where the choreography doesn't work. This guy is in front of Spidey. This guy is behind Spidey. And we have the wall behind us with that mesh, right? So this guy gets a shot in. He hits Spidey. Spidey is going to he's coming down. His weight is going to be on his left hand. And his legs are up in the air. In the very next second, somehow his legs are down on the ground. He's leaning to the right. His right hand has come up to punch somebody. And it's the wrong guy. Unless we spun 180 degrees, which doesn't make sense because the background's the same. This guy in the gray suit and the blue shirt is the one getting punched, and this guy is getting grabbed. It should be the other way around. And realistically, if Spidey lands with his weight on his left arm, I would think maybe this leg would come out and kick that guy, and maybe he reaches out across his body with his right arm to grab him. Again, just thinking about how people move, and if you were to animate this, to get from this point to this point would take a whole lot of different drawings. There's a lot of movement that happens that we don't see as readers. It's perfectly fine. Part of the issue of comics is that we're not exactly moving from moment to moment, but then here we are. So he's punched that guy, and now a bad guy's shooting at him, and we're okay with that because his feet are on the ground. He's now leaped up in the air. We see the motion. He jumped from there to stick to the wall, and then the next motion is him webbing from that same position. Makes perfect sense. Same thing here. He's webbing. Now, these guys are running over, so we've just flipped kind of the camera angle, and he's webbing these guys. All this little segment of these 3 panels works great. These 2 panels don't. So, again, if you are an aspiring artist and you're going to have a scene where your characters are moving, as long as your focus is on one character, you have to make sure that the transition from movement to movement makes sense. If there were 2, let's pretend it was Spider-Man and Daredevil are both fighting the bad guys, you can cut from one character to the other character, back to the other character, and they can be doing different things. That makes sense. But in here, where our focus never moves from Spidey for an instant, we have to show that moment to moment. So here we have the bystanders. They're getting ready to run. Spidey is going to take care of the rest of these guys. And what I said here, this is an incredibly classic Spider-Man face. This is what you think of when you think of the John Romita era of Spider-Man. This is the kind of face that ends up becoming on merchandise, balloons, lunch boxes, thermoses, glasses, toy packaging, you name it. A very round face, the very large webbing with very delineated pattern. 3 lines, 2 lines, and then the sides. 1, 2, 3, usually 1, 2, 3. and then the same number of web pattern, 1 around the middle, 2, and then this little bit at the chin, same thing going up. This is and the black around the eyes is very large, and the white is a little bit smaller. Again, classic Spider-Man face right there. So now we have the goons, now that the heroes have escaped, and we know this is a big point from a story plot. He knows that this guy's coming up behind him because his spider sense goes off. And so, perfect. He elbows the guy from behind while never stopping. Except, well, this doesn't make sense. Again, he has this guy grabbed with his left hand. This guy is being held by his collar. He punches. So theoretically, what should happen is this should be flip-flopped. This guy that he's still holding should be in Spidey's left hand, and he should be throwing from the elbow back, he should be throwing a right cross across his face to punch this guy in the green. So again, it just doesn't make sense. He switched hands somehow. Anyway, they throw a grenade. So these guys are working for the Goblin. It's the whole plan. And they hit him with this gas grenade. And he says here that the gas is going to dull his senses, specifically his spider sense. Now, some of this, you might go, how does the Green Goblin know? How does he know that he has a spider sense? He will mention it sometimes. Sometimes while Spidey is quipping with his villains, he'll say something about his spider sense. So maybe he's mentioned it. It's a little plot hole that we can look past. One thing I don't, again, I know I'm saying a lot of stuff that I don't care for here, but I'll tell you, when we get to the end and I grade the issue, you'll see I really do enjoy this issue. But that is the color of the Green Goblin's glider is a grayish color, and it's almost the exact same color as the city, and it very much blends in. And if you glance quickly through it, it might look like he's standing on the roof of a building or something, these tiny little buildings. Thank goodness we have the smoke trail, but that's where maybe the city below, instead of, I understand buildings are gray, but this is comic books. We can suspend disbelief, and this could have been colored as maybe a blue or some other tone to help separate the building, that we're looking at, the tall building, versus the far away buildings versus the Goblin glider. So just some thoughts there. The gas doesn't seem to bother Spidey, so off he goes, and he wraps up and finishes these guys. I did want to point out as well, this is a good example of a couple of these where, like, this arm and this lat, so your lats are the muscles kind of on the sides on your back, here as well as he's swinging away, Spidey is yoked. Spidey is jacked in this, and that's one of the things that I think Romita certainly brought with him compared to Ditko. Now again, we're talking about several years difference, but when we look at this Spider-Man, and this is a slightly more buff Spider-Man than we would have seen originally right off the bat, but this version of Spider-Man here, even slightly more muscular, is still considerably thinner than what we're seeing now. And it's okay for a character. Like, here's a great example. So here's him reaching out with his hand, and you can see how far out that back muscle flexes. And we get here, and now he's reaching out, and look how wide that chest is. So Spidey's being drawn almost more like a Batman physique at the time. Again, maybe a Daredevil, something like that, as opposed to a kid who's a freshman in college and is known for being a more thin character. Like right here, this is just muscles galore. Now, he's not as big and bulky as the Hulk, but certainly he's no skinny mini. Yet when he puts on his street clothes, look at how loose they hang off, and he's drawn considerably skinnier. So again, it's suspension of disbelief. It's okay that Peter looks thinner when he puts on his street clothes. We believe it. But as an artist, there's nothing wrong with drawing a thinner but still muscular character anyway. again, we're still in this grid pattern, so things are moving quickly. We haven't reached really a break. Just to kind of recap, it goes from class to Spidey swinging around, immediately seeing bad guys. He's fighting with them. There's no break. He moves through and goes and changes. And here's the whole purpose of this. The Goblin has followed him and watches him change, and his spider sense doesn't warn him that anybody's watching. So now the Goblin knows what he looks like, but he doesn't know who he is yet. So he's going to follow him to see where he lives. And Peter is thinking about, as I mentioned, that issue number 37, 2 episodes ago, where we see Norman Osborn's old partner, Professor Strom, and somebody was going to shoot him. But when Spidey got to the window, nobody was there. The man died of a heart attack anyway. But this whole idea of kind of wondering, is his spider sense, he has like just a bad feeling, right, in the back of his head, and he's wondering if there's something wrong with his spider sense. So he goes to the Daily Bugle, he's looking for some work, and who does he bump into but Ned Leeds. And one of the things, again, that I said here in my notes, you see how soft everybody is. Everybody has a very soft looking face, soft chin, soft nose line, forehead, etc. It's just that style of drawing. Again, if you take away the superheroics, if you said this was a romance comic and these two guys are suitors that are both vying for the same girl, which is essentially what's happening here in the story, this depiction of two male characters would fit. Like, you put in Betty Brant in the middle, it looks like it's straight up, Millie the Model kind of a romance comic. Again, just to compare now, Steve Ditko, and again, bear with me in this episode, everybody. I'm going to do this a lot. One of the things I raved about with Steve was his depiction of individual characters, how unique they were, how different everybody looked. And so we're going to look at like Flash Thompson here. So Flash Thompson shows up a few times. Here's Johnny Storm. He's a blonde guy. He doesn't look like Flash Thompson. Here's Flash. Here's Johnny. They look a little similar. Johnny's a little thinner. His hair's a little different. Here's Flash. They have different body type. Of course, Peter is very different. Here's another depiction of Flash Thompson. And then the women. You have Liz Allen and Betty Brant. They don't look the same. So Steve Ditko is really, really good at drawing very unique characters. This guy is just a red herring. Peter's trying to track somebody, and he thinks it's the right guy, and it's just this weird guy with a big mustache. Turns out to be somebody else. So this is my point. In this issue, this is Ned Leeds. Ned Leeds is a reporter at the Daily Bugle who wants to marry Betty Brant, Peter's ex-girlfriend. Now let's go back real quick. Here's Flash Thompson. We see Flash a couple of times. They don't look so different that I'm like, that's clearly one guy and clearly not the same as this guy. They could kind of be the same character, very close. So just again, something that we're used to in this comic is these really unique individual looking characters. And now we're seeing some more generic faces, and just how faces are drawn. This guy looks like the same way John Romita would draw Captain America or Hank Pym, Ant-Man, or a bunch of other different kinds of blonde-haired, square-jawed characters. And don't get me wrong, obviously the guy is a master. I'm not saying he's not a good artist or he couldn't draw different faces, but that's just what they called the house style. This is what other artists did as well, and it's just something that we see regularly. So now the Goblin knows who he is. He's been listening in with a little portable microphone, so he knows Peter's name, and he follows him home, and surprise attacks him there on his front lawn. And of course, now Peter immediately says, "Oh no! If Aunt May sees what's going on, uh, she'll die. She'll have a heart attack and die." So he's going to web the Green Goblin, forgetting he's not wearing his costume, and his web shooters are tucked away so that if he has to push up his sleeves, nobody would see them. I did question here: has John read Spider-Man before? We all know the motion. Everybody from little kids knows. You take your middle finger and your ring finger, you push them against your palm, you stick your fingers out in the "I love you" symbol, and you turn your wrist out, and you go thwip, 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 right? That's Spider-Man. Why is he only using one finger? When has he ever just used one finger? Again, this is what happens sometimes when you get new artists. So the fight is on, and here we see Aunt May. And this is the first depiction of John Romita's Aunt May. She appears to be younger, yet somehow she's frailer. The doctor said her health, a shock could kill her, but she looks considerably younger. Again, how soft the face is. Parts of her jawline have filled out. Her lips have somewhat filled out. Again, let's look here and see if we can get a picture of Aunt May somewhere. So that's her in the hospital. Is there another picture of Aunt May? Oh yeah, so here's Aunt May right here. So look at Aunt May. I'll even zoom in a little bit. So here's what we're used to Aunt May looking like. Aunt May is, dang it. Come on. Here we go. Aunt May has a very bony chin. You can see the wrinkles are very deep around her face, her eyes, her lips. Very thin. And that's what Aunt May was. And that's one of the ways to depict someone as older. And yet here we have this lovely, she's older, but she certainly doesn't appear to be quite as elderly. And that's, again, a difference between the two artists. I also question this. I even did some research on this. So for me, I'm a big fan of a book that they used to put out that was called the Marvel official Marvel handbook. And so what they had done is they put out these comics that would alphabetically depict every character in the Marvel universe at that time, and they would tell you all about them. So it would give you a biography, it would tell you their statistics, their height, their weight, if they had super strength, what their powers were, and it would explain a lot of stuff. So one of the things it does about Spidey is it talks about how Spider-Man sticks to objects. How does he climb walls? How does he stick? It's not suction, like it's not a suction cup. And unlike the Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire movies, he does not, in the comics, he does not stick to things because he has little tiny hairs like a real spider on his fingers and toes. Spidey sticks to things the way he does in the comics because of electrostatic charges. And basically, it's like super static cling that focuses in his hands and his feet. Theoretically, he could kind of stick any part of his body to anything, but it's primarily focused in his hands and feet. And because it's based on electricity, it wouldn't work through the soles of his shoes. That's why Spidey doesn't wear boots. Spidey wears essentially little socks, thin gloves, so that it works through his costume. But most of the time when you see Spidey running around as Peter and he's getting ready to change, one of the first things he does is he slips off his shoes so that his feet can get a grip. Yet here he's hanging upside down from a tree in his shoes. Doesn't make sense. Again, this is where I'm sure continuity that we're into today wasn't as critical of a feature. You have a change of the artist, and does somebody look at this and go, hey, you have to redraw this page? In the end, you go, it's no big deal. Nerds like me find it to be frustrating. Yeah. So Anyway, we'll see that change, but it's just something that you go, come on, it at least stick with what we've seen. Great shot here of the Goblin using his the blast from his glove. They've really been ramped up. Before they were sort of just blinding and sparkling. Here they're really packing a punch, and Peter realizes it. So the Goblin, now he also doesn't have his spider sense, which he doesn't necessarily realize. The Goblin throws this razor bat, which of course rips up Peter's shirt. This is a great image here of him leaping through the smoke to attack the Goblin, who is ready for him. But this is a very, very nice image here. I would even suggest you could see this as a full splash page as opposed to the half, maybe even on a page turn. I've talked about that a lot, where you want your surprising emotional moments to be when a person turns the page so that they don't see it ahead of time. But that's a really great splash page of action. But the Goblin's ready. He takes Peter out and then takes him away to his hideout. Some nice stuff using the Goblin here in the foreground as a framing agent is very good. All the smoke as well. So Peter's leaping up through the smoke. That's very good. So good stuff from an artistic standpoint. Again, there's too many panels for my liking that aren't grounded in any way. So what I mean by that is we see these aren't too bad, but oh yeah, so here we go. So here there's a little bit of a shadow. That's fine. But there's a few other ones like that. And most importantly, what we're looking at right here is this. What is the Goblin kneeling on? So it's just this bluish background. We're assuming it's the same background as here, but there's no shadows. There's no nothing that would put him against the ground. So is he floating in the air? Is Peter up in the air? This color background is the same as the sky. So are we looking up at the sky and now we're not looking at the sky? It's a little confusing. So the Goblin takes him to his hideout and reveals himself to be Norman Osborn. So, of course, if you're a Spider-Man fan, you probably knew this. We've seen it in movies. We've seen it for 60 years almost in the comics, cartoons, video games. If you don't know that Norman Osborn is a Green Goblin, you've been living under a rock as a comic book fan. But it's a nice reveal. Again, it would be really cool to have this be the last panel, because this is a great image. As he's peeling off that mask, the close-up, you see it still is this face, and the mouth even is inside, but we start to see that chin. It's like he's literally peeling a real face off. That's terrific. And then turn the page, and here's where you see that image of Norman Osborn. That would be a better surprise moment, because the instant we turn the page, you can't help but glance down and go, oh, it's that guy. Okay, so now let's read the rest, and it's not really that surprising. The other thing here, as I said, it's a great reveal, terrific close-ups of Peter here. This is a great close-up. Very, very nice. I really like the inking. The thick line work, that was something that we didn't always see a ton of from Steve Ditko. When he inked his own work, he tended to use a much thinner line. And things in the foreground, one of the ways to depict that is with a much thicker ink line, and that's what we see here on Peter. So this is a great ink job on this face to push him closer to us without the two figures overlapping. Again, great there as well. Nice with him pointing at Peter sitting here kind of stewing, grinding his teeth, secretly flexing against the coils that he's been tied up with. And then here we go to Norman's reveal. Then I said, this is terrible copy. Copy is the lettering, the information here that they've put on the page. Next issue, Spidey saves the day. Well, I guess everything's going to be all right then. Thanks for the spoiler alert. I guess nobody said spoilers The next issue, everything's okay. Spidey saves the day. Now, you could still call the next issue with a title, it's Spidey Saves the Day, but let's wait a month. Let's build that anticipation. What's going to happen? He's caught. Norman knows his identity. He is, it's the last face that Spider-Man will ever see. I mean, he's in a bind. So instead of saying, well, Spidey's going to save the day, maybe can Spidey save the day? You know, really get us to come back the next month. So kind of blew it on that one. And yeah, and then we have the rest of the issue, and you got your letters column and all that kind of stuff. So there we go. And there's the issue. So we're going to jump back over to the desk here and we'll wrap things up. So there we have it. It is Amazing Spider-Man number 39. And as you can see, it is a seminal issue. It is ultimately critical to everything that comes later, both in the comics and all the other media versions of Spider-Man, right? We've seen the Norman Osborn Green Goblin character in multiple movies, again, cartoons, video games. The Green Goblin here as Norman Osborn is becoming Spider-Man's, the Joker to Spider-Man's Batman, right? His true arch enemy. Now, up until this point, it was sort of looked at as a Doc Ock. Dr. Octopus would be Spider-Man's arch enemy. But really, this is the moment when things pivot. The Green Goblin really becomes a thing. And now we start to realize all the motivations that this really was planned out. I believe, I don't know if Nick mentioned it. I don't think he mentioned it in the video from the last episode, but he and I talked quite a bit after we were done recording. And one of the things that he noted was that, yeah, both Stan Lee and Steve Ditko agreed that like all the trail, the breadcrumb trail was there. We saw Norman Osborn in places, even when he wasn't in a speaking role. He was there in the background at times. Maybe you didn't notice, but they really set it up that by the time it was determined, we're going to reveal that the Green Goblin is Norman Osborn, it really couldn't have been anybody else. It would have been a real fake, not even a fake out. It would have been a disservice to the fans to make him somebody that we had never seen before. And you certainly didn't want to make him somebody like J. Jonah Jameson or something like that. So making it Norman Osborn really ended up being the only person that it could be. And it just, I think it's one of the decisions that skyrocketed Spider-Man from being just another superhero to arguably becoming, for quite a while, the premier superhero at Marvel Comics. That on again, off again battle with him and the Green Goblin. So very important issue, very critical. And I was very critical, of course. We made a big distinction, a big change here from co-creator Steve Ditko to John Romita. And I'll say this, again, my friend Nick actually had interviewed and spoken with John Romita at times. And according to all the information, John Romita thought and was sort of not led to believe, but certainly wasn't dissuaded that Steve would come back, right? He was maybe a little unhappy. He was going to leave. He'd be gone for 3 or 4 issues and he'd be back. And in the end, he wasn't. He didn't come back. So maybe, the things that John was doing wasn't so much about establishing his style or his approach to how he wanted to do Spider-Man. It doesn't sound like he had a ton of lead time. This wasn't something like, hey, we're going to give you Spider-Man in 6 months, so start figuring out how you want to draw Spider-Man and how it's going to work. It was just kind of like, hey, here you go. You're the next man up and you're going to draw Spider-Man. So we will see an evolution of how John Romita handles his time on Spider-Man as we move forward in the rest of these issues and episodes. So even though I was critical, this is an important historical issue when it comes to Spider-Man. I think it was very good. There's some good action. So story-wise, it moves through pretty fast. We don't get super distracted with subplots or the plot threads about supporting cast. They're sprinkled in just enough so that it carries through. We can always pull one of those threads later, but things like the frailty of Aunt May, the beginning of warming up of the Peter's classmates to him and starting to build some friendships. We've got the stuff with Ned Leeds that seems to really have kind of, for now, and we'll see, it felt like it had sort of sealed the deal when it comes to Betty Brant. Peter's like, I'm good. I've moved on. She's all yours. And so that was nice little elements mixed in with the whole thing. I'll also say this. I love the cliffhanger. So this is no one and done. And I think we're going to start to see more of that as we move forward. There's still always the occasional, a bad guy has a plan, Spidey foils the plan, wraps everything up by the end of the issue. We will see some of that. But I think we're going to we're heading into the story style of cliffhangers going from 1 month to the next month, so that as a reader, I don't have to decide from month to month, like, do I want to see Spidey fight this villain? And if I skip it, it's okay. It's like, I have to see what happens next month. Is Spidey going to make it? Is Spidey going to stop this villain? Is the city going to be saved? Is Aunt May going to live? All these types of things. And by setting those cliffhangers up for each issue, you bring in a anticipation from the readers that maybe we were missing sometimes in the earlier years. So I think we're heading in that direction. That all said, I would rate this comic out of 10. I give it an 8 out of 10, which again, you might be surprised because of how critical I was, but I think some of it is just the transition and having to adjust to it. I think we're going to see, again, a much more clear style evolving from John Romita as we move forward. And again, John's not the last artist, far from the last artist who will draw Spider-Man. So we'll go through all this process again down the road. And so, yeah, here we go. This is the first time. So thank you, everybody, for joining me on this important and timely and very, like I said, very interesting issue of Spider-Man as we review it together. These videos do come out every Monday at 8 a.m. with the special exception of things like our last week's live stream episode. So make sure you go check that out. So make sure you set to notifications. That will let you know not only when the new video comes out like this, but also when we have live streams planned, or any other types of videos that come out. Right now my schedule is very busy, but I will be doing more art videos before you know it. So we'll be talking about steps on how to create your own books, tips and tricks that I use, techniques to make my own comics, and I want to share with you. So thank you all so much for joining me. I will see you right here next week for another amazing Spider-Man art retrospective video. Thank you so much.